The 2023 Q5 Sportback is certainly a style-forward crossover that's going to cost you more than its boxy counterpart. But if you're looking for something that's a little bit more unique, definitely more stylish, and certainly rarer than the regular Q5, you might want to take a look at the Audi Q5 Sportback. It also compares really well when you stack it up against the other coupe-like crossovers from Germany. But let's roll through the pricing on this model before we get to comparisons. For 2023, it's going to start at $50,300. That buys you the premium trim, which is a little bit more powerful than the base boxy Q5. Keep in mind that part of the price difference between the Q5 and Q5 Sportback's base prices is because we get the more powerful engine standard in the Q5, and that's optional in the non-Sportback Q5. I'm probably going to be tripping over Q5 and Q5 Sportback here a little bit, so I apologize for that in advance. Next up, we have the Premium Plus trim for $54,200. That gets you the Bang & Olufsen sound system, 360-degree camera, heated steering wheel as well. $59,300 buys you the Prestige trim with heads-up display, ventilated seats, navigation, and a few other features. All three of these trims use the same engine. And on these trims, metallic paint is an extra $595, and you can still opt for the Audi Extended Paint Option program, which is really cool, admittedly pretty expensive though. It's just under $6,000, and you can choose from approximately 55 different color choices, so a huge array of exterior color paint choices for the car, and there is some limited ability to choose a custom paint if Audi thinks that your color would work with their scheme. So if you're looking for one of the most unique colors on your new Audi, you don't need to buy an RS3 or an RS7. You can buy a regular old Q5 and get the custom paint option on it. I admit that is really expensive. It's a nearly $6,000 option. But if I was really in love with the Q5 and I wanted something that was really special, really unique, and really made heads turn, I might just choose that option, I have to admit. If you want the optional wheels, they range from $800 up to $2,500 depending on the trim and the wheel you're taking a look at. Also on the options list, rear thorax airbags. For some reason, Audi makes the curtain airbag standard, but the rear thorax bags, those are optional. And those are certainly an option that I would select because they're really going to reduce injuries in T-bone style collisions in the Q5 and Q5 Sportback. So certainly an option that I would get. And it's worth noting that even though they're optional in the Audi, they just don't exist in a lot of the competition. So we should be thankful that Audi makes them optional, but I kind of wish they were standard. Also, we have the convenience package on the base model that gives you memory for driver's seat, XM radio, keyless entry, etc. It's $1,100. I would probably get that one, but I would certainly skip all of the black optics packages. Audi has been making blacked out trim and blacked out wheels, etc. pretty darn expensive on a lot of their vehicles, and there are two different black optics packages here. One's $1,300, the other one's $2,500. I wouldn't get either one. If you want a little bit more pep, there's the SQ5 Sportback that starts at $59,200, will go up to $68,100 plus options, of course. The options list is a little bit different on the SQ5 because it has more standard feature content on the various trims versus the smaller, less powerful engine, but they more or less coordinate with one another as far as the trim walk there. And there's still a decent number of options available on the SQ5. Again, I would skip the optics packages there. Now let's take a look at the competition. For 2023, the SQ5 Sportback or the Q5 Sportback, they're going to be about $4,000 more expensive than the regular Q5. Specifically with the engine that we were taking a look at, it's $3,700 extra if you want the sexier profile, less headroom in the rear, and less cargo room. This comparison is quick and easy because it's really just a styling exercise. Do you like the swoopier roofline, or do you like the boxier profile of the regular Q5 and all of the increased practicality that comes with that boxier roofline? If the answer is you like the swoopier one, but you don't want to pay the extra $3,700, then just go with the boxy one. But if you're good with the price tag, then go ahead and get the Sportback. Now let's move on to an interesting option, the Audi A4. In many ways, coupe crossovers are the modern sedan, if you will, because we have a very similar profile. If you sort of squint enough, you can see it in many of these vehicles. A little bit less so, perhaps, in the Q5 Sportback versus the X4 or the GLC coupe, but it is still certainly there. Now, due to the realities of fuel economy legislation in the United States, there is basically a bit of a bump given to Q5 and GLC Coupe and X4, etc. So they have to meet lower fuel economy standards, which I think is part of the reason that we're seeing manufacturers delivering sedan styling on crossover bodies, because then the fuel economy requirements aren't as stringent. And In some ways, that sort of makes sense because Americans want something that's a bit bigger. They want something that's a bit more practical than a sedan. But some folks like that sedan shape, and there aren't as many options as there used to be, as we seem to be transitioning to this kind of jacked up sedan, if you will. So versus the A4, we have a bigger, more practical cargo area. We have an interior that certainly feels roomier and airier, even though depending on the dimension we're talking about, they're pretty close. We also have a boxier profile that is more in charge and more present on the road, if you will, and in more upright seating position, again, that people really seem to be interested in. But it is going to cost you because the Q5 Sportback starts at $50,300, the A4 sedan with the comparable engine at $42,000. Of course, if you want an A4 that's less expensive than that, there is a base A4 with a less powerful engine, and that will save you a considerable amount of money versus the Q5 Sportback. When it comes to handling, there's not an enormous difference. The Q5 Sportback handles pretty well, so does the Audi A4. Obviously, there's a difference, but it's not going to be as big as you might think. And on the other hand, we get the increased ground clearance and, again, more SUV-like driving position that we find in the Q5. Now, whether or not that is worth $8,000 to you, that's a personal decision. But we do have the benefit of that lift back in the rear, which certainly makes it more cargo practical, even if, depending on what kind of cargo you're putting in, you can fit about the same kind of cargo in there. This is the kind of vehicle that you could take to Home Depot, buy a barbecue, toss it in the back, not a problem. You really couldn't do that in an A4. Obviously, when it comes to fuel economy, there's going to be a penalty for the boxier proportions in the Q5 Sportback. So if you're looking for the optimum fuel economy, you're going to want to go with the sedan. Now let's take a look at the BMW option. $53,400 buys you an X4 with the 2-liter turbocharged engine. Dimensionally, the X4 is a little bit different when you look at the profile. You'll see it has a bit more of a trunklet, I guess you'd say, on the back, so a little bit more of that sedan-like styling than we find in the Q5. The Q5 is really just abbreviated with a more angular rear hatch. The X4 and the GLC Coupe, they're perhaps a little bit more jacked up sedan in their overall profile, but they're also a little bit more expensive, even though they don't really get you more interior room. That's really just styling in the back, the extra length that we see in these options. So $53,400 for the 2-liter turbo, $64,650 for the 3-liter inline 6 in the X4. The X4 is not as buck-toothed as the 4 Series, but the front grille has still been a little controversial, and I do think the Q5 is a bit more timeless and a bit more handsome in terms of its design. I find the seats on the inside of the X4 a bit more comfortable, but the X4 does not get BMW's latest iDrive system, iDrive 8. So when it comes to infotainment, I think it's a bit of a toss-up. The infotainment system in the Q5 is starting to feel a little bit older than I would like, but so is the system in the X4. When it comes to interior design and interior parts quality, I think both of these vehicles have aged pretty well, and I think the interiors work well with the price tag on both of these models. But the BMW will cost you more than the Q5. And if you start adding options, that delta is going to grow a little bit. So if you're looking for the better value option, that's certainly going to be the Audi. And you could use some of that extra value to pay for that custom color if you wanted to. Starting at $52,500, the Mercedes-Benz GLC Coupe also has a jacked-up sedan-like profile. All-wheel drive is standard on this model, and I definitely have a soft spot for the Mercedes interior, both in terms of the parts quality and in terms of the styling. When it comes to the infotainment software, I prefer what we find in the Mercedes right now to the BMW and the Audi, but there's a huge qualification here. And that is the software has a really good look and feel to it in the Mercedes, and the functionality is very high, but the software is beyond unintuitive. I would say it's actually convoluted. That's probably the best way to describe it. So if you're looking for easy-to-use, intuitive software, do not look at the Mercedes. Take a look at the other options. But if you're looking for all the latest features, really slick graphics, nice animations, lots of functionality and features, then you want to take a look at the Mercedes. And maybe it's because I'm kind of a tech geek, but I would take the consequences of choosing the Mercedes system. Now, when it comes to options, you have to be really careful over on the Mercedes dealer lot because they get very expensive very quickly. And if you start loading your GLC up with options, it's going to be a lot more expensive than the Audi. And any way you slice it, comparably equipped, it's going to be more expensive than the Q5 or SQ5. As I said in part 1 of this video series, the Q5 is not a one-trick pony. It's not focusing on handling or fuel efficiency or opulence on the inside or just the length of the options list. Instead, Audi was after a very well-rounded vehicle that tries to strike a balance between all of these various things that are pulling on a luxury car designer. And I think they've really done an excellent job of maintaining that well-rounded focus in a way that we don't always see in every one of the competition out there. If you want something that's more powerful, or you want something that's more luxurious, or handles better, or accelerates faster, you will certainly find that in this segment. But you're going to be paying an awful lot more for it, and for me, that's why I would pick the Q5 Sportback over the other options that we were taking a look at here. Let me know what you think about that in the comment section. What would you pick if you were looking to spend between $50,000 and $60,000? Value is a tricky thing to talk about sometimes because on its surface, doesn't seem like there's a lot of value in a $60,000 SUV, but when you compare the Audi against its direct competition, you will see that in fact it is thousands of dollars less for a very well-rounded and easy-to-live-with crossover. Let me know what you think about that as well. Find me over at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all those other social places, and if you haven't checked out part 1 of this video, be sure and do that now. I'll see all of you later.